guys, we're back again. Thanks for tuning in. We're bringing you another episode of Keto with Plants. Our journey, our version of what we call the ultimate human diet. And that's what I know. It's pretty bold, right?
Yes, it is.
It's bold, so I figured we should talk about that super bold statement right now.
How dare us say that?
How dare us? How dare us? So let's get to the bottom of how we feel like we can be so bold as to say this is the ultimate human diet. So I guess how did we
So
get
you're putting
to
all the pressure on me?
Well, you're the scientist. You're the one with all the years and years of school, a few more than I've had. So
all right. Well, so let's start with the science. So the science is pretty clear that plant-based diets are clearly the best way to be healthy. And if you're going to treat a variety of different diseases using food, plants really are, through many different types of studies and diets, have been shown to be helpful. And of course, the most studied diet anywhere in the world is the Mediterranean diet. And it's been shown to benefit an array of different medical conditions, from heart disease, diabetes, weight loss. It is a diet that has some meat in it. And actually, as it turns out, Mediterranean diets vary as you go around the Mediterranean Sea. But at the core, it's a plant-based diet. And other diets that have been similarly studied, maybe not to the same degree, would be things like the DASH, which what that has been really sort of associated with is hypertension, and it's been shown to benefit that. But it has benefits for other conditions as well, because it typically has 4 to 5 servings of plants per day, which actually isn't a lot, but when you compare that to the standard American diet, that's a pretty significant increase. Ornish would be another, Esselstyn. There's actually a long list of various types of plant-based diets, including veganism, vegetarian. All of those have been studied in various degrees, but the most studied is Mediterranean diet, and it is the most scientifically backed, healthy way of eating. So from that position, it's hard to say, gosh, if you had meat, what's going to be the benefit of health, either detrimentally or positively, because the studies really haven't broken that down to the degree to really say. But there's another body of literature which is more recent, which is related to ketosis, and has shown a number of different beneficial impacts of ketosis, most of which are short-term. We don't really have long-term data yet on ketosis. But in our opinion, when you combine the benefits of being plant-based, which is clearly established in the medical literature, with the prospective benefits and early preliminary benefits of ketosis, that's when you really sort of get that synergy and where we come up with what we consider the ultimate human diet.
Mm-hmm. And the benefits of the ketogenic diet are...
Good question.
Right. So what are the things we're trying to hit to target the healthiest environment for our body?
So if you kind of look at the core benefits of a plant-based diet, I mean, fiber clearly is one of the most important things about plant-based. You really don't get fiber anywhere but plants. And the fiber is important because that's what feeds the bacteria. It's not really necessarily that the fiber helps us, it helps the bacteria which help us. And if you're eating meats and you're eating dairy, you're not getting a lot of fiber. The other aspects of plant-based diet which are beneficial are phytonutrients. Again, they're not in meat or animal products.
And phytonutrients are...
So that would be, you can kind of consider it as a type of vitamin, would be kind of a way to think of it in more general terms. But what it turns out, a lot of phytonutrients are the chemicals that actually result in the color that we see. So a red bell pepper or even just simply green chlorophyll. Chlorophyll could be considered a phytonutrient. So think of them as pigments. So the pigments in plants that draw our eye to it, and we say, wow, that's a gorgeous bell pepper, for example, or the blueberries, or whatever it is you're looking at that's colorful in the produce section. Those are very nutritious. So they're cofactors, and that's your cue.
Cofactors. Sounds exciting. Yeah, cofactors, because you're trying to jazz up vitamins and make them more exciting.
So vitamins and minerals, and actually phytonutrients, are cofactors. In other words, the enzymes in the body that actually run our machinery, our physiology, require a little catalyst. And a way I like to use to explain this is, if we are at the beach having a campfire, we've got wood on the fire and we've got oxygen in the air, and that fire will go as long as there's oxygen in wood. Fortunately, the oxygen doesn't run out, but the wood might. But before you can get that fire and roast your marshmallows or whatever it is you're going to do, you have to have a spark.
Right.
The spark is what gets it going, and that's kind of the way to think of a cofactor. So one of my favorite cofactors is magnesium. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of physiologic reactions, literally hundreds in our body that we need, require magnesium. Magnesium is deficient in most of our, well, certainly in our diet, but actually most Americans are deficient in magnesium. So this little spark we're missing. We don't have energy production, we don't have detoxification, we don't have all these different pathways in our body fine-tuned, operating optimally because we lack the cofactor, we lack the spark, which is magnesium. And the same can be said for the phytonutrients. The antioxidants in blueberries, for example, is one that people are familiar with, or people's favorites, kale, things of that nature. It's those tiny little amounts of the cofactors which really get the machinery working.
Or sparks.
Sparks, yes.
Which also is really close to sparkles, which I love sparkles.
Yes,
so
you do.
I like to think of it as that, my phytonutrients, getting all the sparkles in my diet that I can think of. So I like that. That's good. So then one of the other things that the ketogenic diet is really good for is we want an environment free of inflammation, correct?
Right. So plant-based diets, from the perspective of fiber and the microbiome, the bacteria, are incredibly anti-inflammatory. And also the phytonutrients are anti-inflammatory, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory. So certainly if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you're going to get those benefits, and you get that from Mediterranean diet too, or any of the plant-based diets. But the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant capacity of ketones is additive. It has a different pathway of providing antioxidants, actually specific to the mitochondria, which are little power plants in our cells. And also the anti-inflammatory aspect is very unique. So there's a inflammasome. You can kind of just think it as a system of inflammation, or a way to counter inflammation. And beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the main ketone, I know it's a lot of words, actually will impact the inflammasome, reducing inflammation directly. And as I mentioned, the beta hydroxybutyrate will act to reduce reactive oxygen species in the mitochondria. So that's an antioxidant in the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. So the mitochondria are the little factories of our body for making energy. So they're like a nuclear power plant, or
right. We want happy mitochondria.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, mitochondria are fragile. So we lose them in part from inflammation. Mm-hmm. And inflammation is basically the root of all disease. And as it turns out, the mitochondria loss or loss of function as a result of inflammation or otherwise is playing a role in a lot of the symptoms. So for example, that brain fog, fatigue, muscle aches, all kinds of different processes require
even mood, I would think.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. So
what am I doing?
Yeah, so if we don't have enough energy in our cells, we're not going to have energy in our bodies. Our brain's not going to work right. Our heart's not going to work right. Congestive heart failure, where your pump is just not able to squeeze. Your muscle's not contracting. So beta hydroxybutyrate, the ketone, has an effect that's additive to the effects from a plant-based diet. And that's where we think this synergy is so important, is that we're adding another layer of protection, if you will, mm-hmm. or enhancement of our physical performance.
Okay. So then people could just eat plants. You're saying a plant-based. So then it seems like a lot of traditional, like vegan, and I mean, I've been a vegan years and years ago, where we ate a lot. I mean, as long as it's a plant, you can eat it. So all of the grains you want, rice and this and that and the other. So what would be an issue maybe with eating high grain-based, plant-based diet?
Yeah, I think that we've come a long ways in nutrition science recently, and understanding that the macronutrients are really important.
And a macronutrient?
So macronutrients are fats, proteins, and carbohydrates.
I did know this. I was just
And then we subclassify those. We have amino acids from proteins, we have fatty acids from fats, and then we have the different types of carbohydrates. Fiber is wonderful. We want as much of that. It's recommended that we ingest 35 grams of fiber a day. The average in America, 5. Mm-hmm. And I would tell you that ancestrally, it's probably above 100.
Mm-hmm.
It could even be 200. So more fiber is better. It's definitely an adjustment. As we increase fiber, we may see some changes in our bowel habits, among other things, but we will get used to it. We'll adapt to it, and the bacteria in our gut change, and that's what's so critical.
Mm-hmm.
So within the carbohydrates, simple sugars and even worse things like high fructose corn syrup are actually not good for us. Fiber is wonderful for us, and the resistant starch is actually also very good for us. So if we're going to eat high carbs, we want to focus on fiber, which really don't come into play in terms of the metabolic effects, and then resistant starch would be the things that I would really emphasize with plants. If you're a vegan and you just have complete, disregard for what type, reckless abandon with carbs.
Captain Crunch.
Yeah, that's not going to be good for you. Okay. So, that's kind of a faux vegan if you ask me, because you're not going to get the benefits that you think you are.
Right. Okay. Okay, good. And then what about, why are we leaning more plants than animal? Like what are maybe some of the side effects of eating a lot of animal products?
Well, most of the information we have from animal products revolves around two things: dairy and red meat primarily. Dairy has some pretty compelling evidence that is not good for us from the perspective of cancer and longevity, primarily the cancer. A lot of it is population based, but with huge numbers, and so it's pretty compelling. It's something that's hard to dismiss. And then you just look at nature. We are the only animals on the planet that after we wean, eat dairy. And
that we drink dairy from another species.
So,
it kind of goes against
it just doesn't
nature.
Seem right.
But why is it so delicious and good and make us feel like, dairy?
Yes, that's a really good question. And actually, when I stopped drinking coffee, it was not the coffee or the caffeine that was so difficult. It was the dairy. So dairy stimulates the opioid system in our body. So
like the same system that heroin and...
Absolutely. Yes.
That's pretty tough.
And it's very powerful. Obviously, it makes us feel really good. And so I had to have a latte every afternoon. And it wasn't the caffeine.
Which you thought it was.
I thought it was.
I'm so sleepy, I need my caffeine.
It was the good feeling that I got from the opioid stimulation that comes with dairy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then, so what about fish and eggs? Like, what about where are they opting out of?
So from a animal products perspective, clearly cold water fish would be the healthiest flesh that you could eat. The fats within it are very concentrated in the omega-3s, which are very healthy fats. So it's good quality fat within the animal flesh itself. Similarly, eggs are a wonderful composition of very healthy nutrients, some of which you just don't get anywhere else unless you eat organ meats, and one of those is choline. It's rich in cholesterol, which unfortunately got a bad rap, for the last couple decades, but as it turns out, that's not the case. Cholesterol is essential. We can't live without it. And in fact, our hormones that all of us want to have at normal levels, whether it's testosterone, estrogen, etc., they're actually made from cholesterol.
Interesting.
So one of the problems with driving down cholesterol with these medicines, which now can get cholesterol levels down under 50, is you're not going to make your hormones.
Mm.
And the brain is actually largely composed of cholesterol.
Right.
So I personally want my brain to be happy, so I'm going to ingest cholesterol.
Right. Yeah, let's keep these brains happy. And then what was the poultry? Why would, people are like, oh, it's lighter meat. I mean, obviously we're pro-fat here, so we don't want, lean meats, but, people think they're eating healthy when they're eating poultry. Oh, I don't eat red meat, I eat poultry.
Yeah, well, so most common poultry in America, chicken. Chicken has a real problem in that it's loaded with all kinds of chemicals. Treated with antibiotics, treated with arsenic. And, it's only recently that the FDA actually acknowledged that was the case, that arsenic is in our poultry.
And now why were they doing that? Because they were becoming resistant to the antibiotics?
Right. So when you raise animals so close together, if one gets sick, you can wipe out the entire population.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of money loss. So yes.
Yeah, and so that's a problem in particular with poultry, with chicken, but poultry in general tends to have a less favorable omega-3 composition. So cold water fish, nearly ideal in terms of the omega-3 versus omega-6. Poultry, as a broad category, is the opposite. And so chicken's one of the worst when it comes to high omega-6, low omega-3. Certainly a free-range chicken is better, but it's still nothing like cold water fish, and it's actually worse than things like lamb or beef.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so poultry is not something I would, suggest as far as if you're a meat eater. I definitely think cold water fish or a good wild game grass-fed beef or something like that would be the options that would be healthier than poultry.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Everybody thinks they're so healthy eating chicken.
Exactly. And I would have, numerous times I have people tell me, oh, I eat chicken and rice.
Right.
It's like the arsenic double whammy, because a lot of the rice that, certainly the rice that's produced in this country, is pretty heavily laden with arsenic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then I guess I've got pork on my list to, I guess cover all the bases. So what's, so bad about pork?
So I think that pork is probably in that red meat category. It has to be pasture raised, obviously. The difference between grain-fed animals and pastured or grass-fed is that the food that they're consuming has the optimal omega mix already. So what they eat impacts what their composition is, just like us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are basically made up of what we ingest. So if we eat healthy, we're healthier. If they eat healthier, they're healthier.
And they're not eating healthier because it's expensive. They want to grow them fast. They want to get them to the slaughterhouse and on the grocery store shelves making money.
Yeah, so roughly 100 years ago, a lot of food production changed for efficiency. So it's all about productivity. It wasn't about the quality. It wasn't about whether it tasted good. It was how quickly can we get it to the market for the lowest cost, the lowest use of land, the lowest use of resources like water. Mm-hmm. That's where we are.
Sounds good. Sounds appetizing. So I guess that's as brief as we could make it, trek down to us weighing the pros and cons and looking at all the avenues of eating and diets and ancestral diets versus what we're stuck with now as far as toxic load in foods and whatnot and all of that stuff. And that's how we've come to plant-based keto being the ultimate human diet.
Yep, it's basically taking what we've already been pretty well established within the medical literature, that a plant-based diet is the healthiest, and it's taking ketosis to take it to the next level.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you very much.